So we are back at WikidataCon 2023, and now we'll have Daniel Mitchin presenting structured data and collaborative curation, wiki projects, and Wikidata. I'm your facilitator for this session, so by the end of his presentation, I'll go through the chat and you can leave a question there or you can raise your hand to speak up. So Daniel, the floor is yours. Welcome. Please come here to the stage and give your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm sharing my screen. Does that work? Can you see that? Can someone give me auditory feedback? I don't see any.
Yes, we can see your screen and we can hear you well. We are all good to go.
Okay, good, thanks. So the purpose of this session here is from my end to basically start a discussion across wiki projects and across wikis on how we handle structured data about wiki projects. And I'll start with a brief overview of the structure of the talk. So I will give an overview of what wiki projects are and how they're named in different corners of the ecosystem. And I'll give some examples of wiki projects that are actually active on Wikidata. I'll highlight some aspects of structured data that Wikidata has about wiki projects. Give some examples of how wiki projects use Wikidata, and then basically comment on some of this. But then most of the time I would actually like to spend on discussion on how we can move forward in terms of improving the coordination, consistency of how we deal with wiki projects. Okay. And you see my entire screen, so any comments in the chat or so I will only be able to perceive afterwards or by media.
Hey, Daniel, I hope you can hear me. I hope everyone can hear me. So as you may have noticed, we experienced some technical issues and we basically couldn't hear most of you talk. So
okay.
A suggestion, since we actually have some extra time because the session was cancelled, and if you don't mind, of course, is that you would start again from scratch and we would delay slightly the next presentation so everyone can enjoy your talk. What do you say?
Yeah, I can do that. I just finished it, and I didn't notice when you were kicked off. I also didn't notice that I was kicked off because, yeah, I shared my entire screen and I was
I guess
that somebody would warn me.
I'm really sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. I ignored the messages that came in on my phone, but thanks for those who messaged me. Anyway, yeah, I can do also a shorter or a longer version. The basic thing is I wanted to trigger some discussion, so I had timed it such that I would be finished after 15 minutes, which I actually was. And,
yeah, which is great, and we can still take some time for this. Really, like let's just admit that nothing happened, and it's still the beginning of your session, and you're gonna take the time that you need for that. So if you want to share your slides again, and then give the presentation, and then have time for discussion, that's great.
Okay, let me do that. Okay, do you expect a response, Beat, or how do we handle that? I'm waiting for someone to give me the sign to start.
You can start, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, in this session, I want to trigger some discussions about how we can optimize or improve the role of wiki projects in triggering or supporting collaborative curation, and also what the role of Wikidata can be in that, or what it is right now, and how can we improve on that. The talk has a few sections, but it is meant to be short, and so I'll yeah, they are not long sections, so I will give an overview of the wiki projects, how they look like, then which ones are active on Wikidata, and what kind of structured data is available about them, how wiki projects use structured data from Wikidata, and then like what kind of issues are emerging when you deal with these kinds of issues. So first, an overview. Here there are a number of wiki projects. They come in different sizes, shapes, granularity. Most of our wikis have some. And some of them might already be long going, others might be rather short lived, dedicated to a particular event or so. And they might not also come by the name wiki projects. So for instance, on Wiki Voyage, they're named expeditions. And on the German Wikipedia, they are named Redaktionen. Then which wiki projects are active on Wikidata? There are here is just an example. So Wiki Project Music is caring about music. Wiki Project Every Politician is trying to catalog politicians and what they do. There's Wiki Project Brazilian Laws. There's Wiki Project COVID-19, and there are many others. The traditional way of navigating the Wiki project landscape is via categories. And Wikidata has inherited this way of doing it from the other wikis, basically. But yeah, Wikidata does not make much use of categories otherwise, and so also the categorization of the wiki project is not very intense compared to some of the others. You still can see that, for instance, there are certain types of wiki projects that are being grouped, those that are pertaining to science or society or sports or geography or things like that. And yeah, so, but Wikidata is about structured data, and so let's see what kind of Wikidata has. What kind of data Wikidata has about wiki projects. And so there are different kinds of things. The first kind of structured data that Wikidata had initially was just site links, like which entry in one wiki corresponds to an entry in another wiki. Initially, this was meant only for main namespace things like Wikipedia articles or wiki source pages, basically, or works in Wikisource. But by now it has been applied also to wiki project pages, and those wiki projects they exist on Wikipedia. So here, Wiki Project Taiwan, for instance, exists on 9 Wikipedias. But there are also some wiki projects that have presences in other wikis. For instance, here, Wiki Project Women in Red has a presence on the English Wikisource and on the Italian Wikibooks. Another kind of information that Wikidata has about wiki projects is statements. I've chosen here a simplified representation of some statements about Wiki Project COVID-19. So it's an instance of a wiki project. It's also tagged as an instance of a biological database and a medical database. That is to some extent debatable. It's expressed that this wiki project is interested in the virus SARS-CoV-2, the disease that it causes, and the pandemic that came from it. And it has a main category like this. Most wiki projects do not have much more in terms of annotation, although some actually go into more detail, like when it was founded and things like that. But there is room for further annotations. Once we have structured data, we can run queries on it. And one way to do that is via Scholia, which has a dedicated wiki project aspect that you can use to browse what's known about wiki projects in Wikidata. And from that, we see that, for instance, the scope of different wiki projects is quite large. So, for instance, here the document the Project Riksdagen from the Swedish community about basically legislative documents and also politicians related to their national parliament has 250,000 items in their scope. A similar order of magnitude also for Wiki Project Invasion Biology, so a science project, and New Zealand thesis project, another one with a national scope. Scholia also has, let's say, profiles for individual properties, and so I pulled out the 2 that are most relevant for wiki projects. One of them is called On Focus List of Wikimedia Project, P5008, and the other one is called Maintained by Wiki Project, P6104. And we already see that both of these properties are used quite intensively. but essentially there is very little overlap. Most projects use just one of them. There are some that use both of these properties, but there is not a lot of consistency actually. But structured data can again help surface these things, and then we can have a discussion about how things could be improved. Then some of the ways in which wiki projects use Wikidata is essentially to fill gaps. So here we have Wiki Project Women in Red, which is concerned with missing articles about women on wikis in general. This example is from the English Wikipedia. And so even though the English Wikipedia does not have entries about these people here, there is some information from Wikidata that's being harnessed. There's also information about site links. So if two wikis already have information about that person, then maybe we can check out that information, and that helps in writing the article in English. And the use of Wikidata across wikis and also within and across wiki projects is quite diverse. But I would say Wiki Project Women in Red is one of the more elaborate uses, and so it can serve as an interesting example, because lots of facets of how you could be using Wikidata data are actually popping up in that context. Another aspect here, you can what's interesting about this is you can actually structure the gaps in your own wiki by additional knowledge. So if you would say, without knowledge external to the English Wikipedia, it would be hard to say which of the red links are actually microbiologists, for instance. But thanks to the additional information that is available via Wikidata, you can actually structure the gaps that exist inside a given wiki. Now some observations. So we have a number of workflows to, let's say, help with consistency within wiki projects. These are things like listeria and integrality. These are tools that basically look at how things are or how things could be, should be. We also have constraint violations. They typically are not tagged as being for a particular wiki project, but in practice there is quite some overlap. In terms of consistency across wiki projects, I already mentioned the P5008 and P6104 kind of thing. There is just a little consistency. And then another example where wiki projects are not consistent is the granularity of the instance of or subclass of values. So for instance, for anything that is a human, we say that it's a instance of a human, Q5, and then all the other specifics you might want to express about that human, they're expressed using other properties. Whereas for other things, like for instance, publications or many other things, we put the granularity directly in the instance of statement, which then is an inconsistency that for wiki projects that cover multiple types of things causes problems. And for discussions around that, the mechanisms are actually different on Wikidata as compared to many of the other wikis, because on Wikidata, the talk pages for individual items or so are essentially not used, or much less than on other projects. And so, that changes the nature of the discussions. Also, it's a multilingual site, which also has an impact on how the discussions go. And so that's why I'm putting here decision-making as yet another thing that might be worth discussing. And that's basically the kinds of things I wanted to discuss. The slides will be available under this DOI. I haven't uploaded them yet. Now I'll go back to, I'll stop screen sharing for a moment so I can see the chat. Okay, somebody thanked me, so I suppose you heard me.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Now it's basically up to everybody else to say something. I have no time. How much time we now have?
We still have plenty of time. So if people want to say something, you can either raise your hand and then you will be granted the right to speak, or you can also write in the chat. I see that we have Lydia.
Yes. Thanks so much, Daniel. That was super interesting. One thing that I was missing from your observation and that I would think would be super useful if we all spent some time on it is that a lot of the wiki projects aren't very explanatory what it's about, right? If you are new to Wikidata and you get thrown into a wiki project, it's very nichey and clicky and not super welcoming. And I think it would be super amazing if we could all spend some time on making that a bit more welcoming and easier to understand what each wiki project is about.
Yeah, and for that, it would actually help to have a more general introduction as to what a wiki project in general is about. And also, sometimes we have these distinctions between a wiki project and we have the task forces. For someone who comes new into the ecosystem, there's also a distinction between the wiki projects and the Wikimedia projects. And then any individual projects within any of that. So yeah, it's complex, complicated. And yeah, that's the kind of thing that I think would merit some more discussion, which is why I wanted to have this session.
We have one question here in the chat from Peter. So he's saying one problem is how to infer what project is interested in an item. For example, Wiki project ships is linked to from ship, but how can one figure out that stream ship or Titanic is part of the project?
Yeah, you could go in and tag those things with one of those two properties, or maybe even some others. And typically this is being decided within a particular wiki project. So somewhere on the main page or on some of its sub pages, there will usually be some guidelines on what to tag and how. But yeah, as is often the case, the documentation is not most complete. It might not be up to date. It might not actually accurately reflect actual practice. And even if it did at some point, then somebody who's new and joins the project, they may not follow that entirely, or they might actually follow the documentation, which is basically reflecting outdated practices. And so the inconsistency can come in multiple ways.
Thank you. I see that we have one hand raised here. So Bit, please open up your mic and speak up.
You have to allow me, I think.
No, we hear you already.
Okay, everybody hears me? You need to broadcast me, I think. Oh,
Yes.
okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Daniel, for this presentation. A major challenge I'm currently observing is that the class structure, subclasses, the class trees, they're shifting around a lot. And it's very hard to keep them tidy. And they are something that is often shared between Wikidata projects. So do you have any ideas or thoughts on how we can come to grips with that?
Ideas, yes. So, for instance, if you go to the Scholar profile of an individual wiki project, you will see there is a panel on basically neighboring wiki projects or other wiki projects that are tagging the same things or overlap with other wiki projects. And the reason why we included that is to basically facilitate discussions. If wiki project ships notices that they have overlap with wiki project trees or whatever, I'm just making this up, then they could have a conversation about how to model the materials that the ships are made from, or something like this, right? Right now, this does happen because most people who are active in one wiki project are also active in some other project. And so they transfer some of the habits from one to the other. But it rarely happens at a systemic level so that a wiki project as such is having a conversation with another wiki project as such at the wiki project level. And that's the kind of thing for which I think we need some better channels.
We have a question here in the chat from Frederick. So he's saying, what's the conceptual nuance between the two properties?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I'm the best person to report on this. But as far as I understand, and I actually tried to summarize it on the discussion page of both of those properties, there is the concept of a focus list, which means that there is a list that is explicit, and so everything that's on the list is considered the focus list, and then there's a dedicated property to express the fact that this particular item is, or even property is on the focus list. And each wiki project can decide what goes onto the focus list. And that's what the P5008 is for. It has traditionally not been used that way. It is often used by projects that actually don't run an unfocused list. And I think that was one of the reasons why the other thing was proposed, but I didn't really dig into all the history of that. And the other one basically just says maintained by Wiki project. And I think it was originally intended for just properties. It is by now being used for items as well. And so that's yet another inconsistency. Should we use the tagging, the same kind of tagging for items and for properties, and maybe even lexemes? I haven't actually looked much at how the lexemes are being tagged. But for the moment, yeah, these are the two main properties, and they're used in rather inconsistent ways, but somewhat consistently inside most of the wiki projects.
And we have a few comments here in the chat, so I'll go through some of them. And please, Daniel, feel free to build on them. So RTNF is saying, what I like about wiki projects is that they provide a sense of legitimacy regarding which items are considered notable enough to exist on Wikidata. For example, when we experimentally add a new kind of data to Wikidata, something that has hardly been modeled before, this type of experimental item is subject to high scrutiny by the community, and there is a significant chance of deletion.
Okay, I don't know where you saw this, but this sounds very relevant. Yeah, can't say much more.
Okay, then Peter is saying a big problem with projects in Wikidata is that either there are few people interested or there are too many people to use the project tag to communicate.
Yeah, that is this limit. We have one mechanism by which you can basically ping people, and this ping mechanism typically stops at 50 like addressees. And also, even if you are being pinged via this mechanism, it's typically not clear like where precisely and how precisely you're being pinged, because it is treated as if you were pinged personally, but you weren't. And yeah, so there's room for improvement of those communication channels.
Yeah, another comment here is that maybe these projects need more structured approach, like having templates for item models, entity schemas, tool workflows, etc. The availability of this is very hit or miss between projects, or sometimes even conflicting. Do you have a comment on that, Daniel? Anything that you want to add on this?
Yeah. So these kind of problems that I outlined here, they're not entirely new. They have essentially been experienced by most of the other wikis as well. And in most wikis, there have been occasional discussions about it, but nothing systemic has been done about it. On the English Wikipedia, in contrast, there has been a project called Wiki Project X, almost a decade ago, I would say, not entirely 10 years. Which actually tries to come up with templates, tries to make it simpler to set up a wiki project, tries to make it simpler to onboard people, tries to make it simpler to come up with policies and all the things that you need in order to start a wiki project. And this, I think, to the extent that I remember, it had a useful set of pilots, but I think it was never really rolled out at scale. And yeah, I don't think anyone has actually even planned of doing something similar on Wikidata, but I think Wikidata should actually be even more amenable to this kind of standardization. But yeah, might well be, yeah, somebody asked, is there a wiki project? There might well be, but like most wiki projects are actually essentially dead. And so even if there is a wiki project, it doesn't actually mean that it does what you would expect it to do. that is yet another problem. But on Wikidata, it should also be easier to detect these kinds of things, and especially if the items are tagged properly. But yeah, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. If it's not properly tagged, we can't really detect too much what activity is going on within the scope. If the scope is not expressed clearly in structured terms, it's hard to say. Then also the question is, if we suppose we could express the scope of a wiki project in structured terms, let's say all instances of Q5 are within scope of wiki project biography or something like this. Then the question is, should we still tag the individual items that meet this criterion? I could see arguments for, in both directions. One, like for this kind of tagging, would be that it makes the querying easier, and it also makes it easier to co-discover, like let's say, other wiki projects that do the same thing. But yeah, as Nicolas is pointing out, this would be redundant in many cases, and so yeah, it's yet another kind of thing that would would need discussion and certain weighing of considerations, some sort of systemic optimization.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'll jump to a very on-point question here from Tuka. So they're saying, are there plots about a project's activity over time?
I think I've seen something like this, but it was piecemeal, probably for just single wiki projects, or maybe 2 or 3, a handful that just happened to have the same people involved. And I know Wiki Project Medicine on the English Wikipedia has been rather systematic about this for a while. I actually don't know what the current state is. So they typically ran a bot every year, I think, once a year, that kind of summarized how many people were doing something within the scope of that wiki project. I haven't seen anything similar on Wikidata.
Thank you again, Daniel. And Peter, is your hand raised, or do you want to open up your mic? Please feel free to be here on the stage with us.
I don't hear Peter. So while there's silence here, I would like to comment on this. Oh, okay, go ahead. Peter, please go ahead. Well, to me, it sounded as if someone wanted to say something. So maybe it's just the echo that I'm getting while I'm speaking. And so I'll comment on the inference issue. So in theory, it's enough if we tag things just once in the graph, and then we can infer these things by just queries. The problem is if you deal with larger graphs, like all people or all stars or all wiki site items, then we're reaching the limits of the query endpoint, which is the reason why certain things are tagged actually in a redundant fashion. So we have things like inverse properties, which in most cases wouldn't actually be necessary if inference would work properly. And also we have things like essentially every geographic item is being tagged as what the country is it belongs to. So even though it might already have other geographic information that essentially also maps to the country. And so there are several layers of redundancies in the graph already, which have various pros and cons. And the tagging for the wiki projects would basically fall into the same category. But I think it would be useful to have that discussion on the scale of Wikidata rather than on a per wiki project basis. And yeah, I would also think having, let's say, a standard for setting up wiki projects would be useful, and some technical support that would at least be aware of that standard or help enforce it would be nice.
Before we move on, Peter, can you please try to raise your hand again and try to speak? Because I feel like you're trying to talk, but yeah. Let's see if you can talk now. Can you open up your mic, please? Talk. Yeah, we still can't hear you. Please feel free to write a question in the chat. We still have a few minutes here. If anyone else wants to raise your hand and speak, and this is your time as well.
Well, while we have a moment of silence, I would encourage everyone to just go to a random wiki project on Wikidata or even elsewhere in the ecosystem. Think about how this system could be improved. To what extent could particularly structured data about the wiki projects help? So for instance, should we have a dedicated property that defines the scope in a way that's different from main subject or similar things that we already have? Should we have entity schemas, and should we build tooling that actually, or should we have constraint violations that are specific to wiki projects, things like that? Or should we set up a template, a dummy, a sandbox, or a forkable Wikidata project, or some I'm tired. A forkable wiki project, something like this, right? So please just, whenever you come across the next item or the next wiki project, just think about this and then share your thoughts.
Daniel, we have Peter here. So he's saying another problem is that Wikidata provides little support for the modeling needed in many projects. For example, there are meta classes in ships, but there is nothing that prevents, for example, a ship like the Titanic being a subclass of a steamship.
Yeah, modeling support is not trivial. I personally use a lot of those Wikibase, throwaway Wikibase instances actually from Wikibase Cloud for this kind of thing. It's if you're not sure about the data model, it is a bit problematic that on Wikidata you first need to create the property, and most people can't do that. And even people who have the right, like the technical right, they don't have the social right to create properties. And all of this is good for good reason. And not everyone wants to set up their own Wikibase, and so yeah, it's complicated. And modeling support, I think, the upcoming data modeling days, they already kind of have sensed this as a problem, and I personally think we should have more of those. We should have regular modeling sessions, and the question then is to what extent we can make this a Wikidata-wide activity, because the modeling typically is very specific. It is like to go back to some that I was involved in personally, is whether on an item about a scholarly article, the issue should be a qualifier to the volume statement or to the journal statement or not. Right now, it's a flat structure, but there have been suggestions to make it a qualifier, right? Things like that. That's very specific, and most people, even on Wikidata, would have very little interest in that particular discussion. But data modeling, as in general, is probably of interest to most people who participate in Wikidata. And so we have to find a way in which we can balance this needed specificity to get the models right with the, let's say, community habit of actually making modeling part of the routine things and building workflows, tools for that. We already have pages like request a query, and maybe we should have something similar that is called request a model or a data model or something like this. And then let's see how things develop. This request a query is a fascinating page. It's one of the highlights of the Wikidata culture, I would say. And yeah, there is a request page for entity schemas, but I don't think that's necessarily the same thing. So a data model can be thought of in terms of entity schemas, but that's a rather formalized model already. And I think initially it's just enough. Okay, we want to have a few statements, and they should involve these properties. It's essentially the same thing what the entity schema says, but most people prefer to read some human readable text rather than an entity schema. And we don't have an automated conversion to and from either. Maybe the GPT tools can help with that.
And Beat has one comment here. I wonder whether it would be useful to protect central class items. It is particularly annoying if the top-level ontological structure of your field keeps changing around. Do you have an opinion about it, Daniel?
I understand the sentiment. I'm not particularly sure about which particular top-level structure you're talking about, Beat. I have seen a few flips. I don't see the same flip happening often. Most of the flips that I see, they are actually in different parts of the ecosystem, sometimes quite related, but not like an edit war going on or so. But yeah, vandalism to class items is a different beast than a vandalism to a description in a particular instance of a class. And so, yeah, we should probably think about layers of protection in a more hierarchical or more ontological way.
So great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Daniel. Thank you, everyone who commented here on the chat. I think we can have this quick 5-minute break until our next session that will be supercharging Wikidata with external alliances and new entity types. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's keep here the energy going for this day of WikidataCon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.